Hello and welcome to this episode of Sample Studios podcast, which is called Halfway to Falling. The exhibition Halfway to Falling commences Cork's Sample Studios Tactic Visual Arts 2021 programme that marks its 10th anniversary. Halfway to Falling is a series of collaborative printworks, film work and responses by the Just City collective. In early 2020, the artist Kate O Shea received the Just City Narrative Neighbourhood Residency Award with Common Ground in Dublin 8 with her proposed project How Much Is Enough? This is the first of a series of collaborative artworks from this participatory social arts project. Rooted in Studio 468, St Andrew's Community Centre in Rialto, Dublin 8, Kate is being mentored by community workers and activists John Bissett and Rita Fagan. The project has since evolved into a collective of artists, activists, community workers, researchers and academics from multiple cities around the world exploring spatial injustices within our cities. My name is Olney and I'll be your navigator during the following exciting and explorative piece of work where this podcast also serves as a means of pausing midway through the 2-year project in order to critically reflect on some of the pivotal points or events that have shaped the narrative of the project so far. I'm lucky to be joined by the hugely productive and enigmatic social artist Kate O Shea, who is currently in lockdown in her childhood home in County Kerry. Kate is the central energetic force behind this broad spanning project and is here to help us make sense of it all. She in turn has invited some of the participants from the Just City collective, Siobhan Kavanagh, John Bisset, Fionnuala Connell and Krini Kafiris, all of who will be introduced properly later when we discuss how their work has shaped, informed, guided the trajectory of the project so far. So each guest, through reflecting about their own work and the collaborations within the project, will introduce and explore some of what become the main thematics driving the project. We will hear from each guest and Kate will respond to this also in terms of her perspective. The podcast will also be beautifully punctuated by the stunning and ethereal voice of Siobhan Kavanagh. We conclude the podcast then with some reflections on the experiences with Halfway to Falling, as well as dwelling upon how this kind of project might situate itself within broader themes concerning participatory social art practice. I am Dr. Olney, a socially engaged artist, activist, curator, educator and practice-based researcher. My practice incorporates a feminist ethnographic approach to social change through creative methodologies in constructing alternative social imaginaries. And this is in accordance with the philosopher and political theorist Cornelius Castoriadis' conception of the social imaginary. I conceived and lead the collaborative social scheme Art Architecture Activism and have co-produced with Kate O Shea the major social arts programme Spare Room, which was funded by the Irish Arts Council in Cork in 2019. I'm currently leading a creative social living working learning scheme called the Living Commons and have 5 programmes in development funded again by the Irish Arts Council entitled The Living Commons Reconfiguring the Social. I'm a member of the Transnational Institute of Social Ecology and a founding member of Aesthetics of Empowerment with another one of the guests here, Krini Kafiris, and that is an international feminist research training collective. And my latest publications can be found in the current issue of Art Research Journal, Past Part 2. So then, as part of the Just City collective that Kate has put together, I'm mainly involved in formulating different methodologies for critical reflection on the project through both artworks like this, as well as visual ethnographic work, and within my capacity at heading the Living Commons project, which is also engaging with Kate's Just City collective.
A fine young girl all in the month of May. She was gathering the rushes just at the break of day. But before she's come home, she's brought a little son, and she's rolled him all underneath her apron. Well, she cried at the threshold as she's coming at the door. and she buried in her apron the little babe she bore. Said her father, "Where have you been, my little daughter Jane? And what's that you've got underneath your apron?" "Oh, father, dear father, it's nothing then," said she. "Sure, it's only my new gown, and that's too long for me. And I was afraid it would draggle in the dew, so I rolled it all underneath me apron. But in the dead of the night, when all were fast asleep, this pretty little baby, I began to weep." Said her father, "What's that birdie crying out so clear in the bedroom among the pretty maidens?" "Oh, father, dear father, it's nothing then," said she. "Sure, it's only a little birdie that fluttered to me knee, and I built for it a nest, and I'll warm it on me breast, so it won't wake early in the May morning. But in the third part of the night, when all were fast asleep, this pretty little baby, I began to weep." Said her father, "What's that baby crying out so clear in the bedroom among the pretty maidens?" "Oh, father, dear father, it's nothing then," said she. "Sure, it's only a little baby a stranger gave to me. Let it lie, let it sleep this night along with me, and I'll tell to you its daddy in the May morning." Oh, was it by a coalman got, or a fella down the town, or was it from a ploughing lad a ploughing up and down, that gave to you the stranger you wear under your gown, where you met with him on a May morning? No, it wasn't by a coalman got, nor a fella down the town. I got it from a ploughing lad that ploughs the watery main. It was down by yonder spring, where the small birds they sing, where I met with him on a May morning.
So before I ask Kate to perhaps divulge a little bit more context on the project, I'll first give you some insight to her own professional practice. So she is a socially engaged artist, and her socially engaged artistic practice and collaborative projects include the People's Kitchen, supported by the Artist and Community Scheme, by Create Ireland, funded by the Arts Council of Ireland, and that's been running since 2016. The Living Commons, which is led by myself, and that has been running as well since 2018 to the present. Spare Room, she co-produced Spare Room, Art Architecture Activism, between 2017 and 2019, again funded by the Irish Arts Council, and Dirty Books Publishing House, which is a co-production with the graphic designer Victoria Brunetta, which was conceived in 2016 and to the present. And Nomstock Festival, a co-production with Aoife Scanlon and Emer Casey in 2014, and loads of other stuff as well. That's just too much to go into. So, as I mentioned, Common Ground awarded Kate O Shea the Just City Counter-Narrative Neighbourhood Residency Award in March 2020, when Ireland was entering its first period of lockdown, which can never be a good omen for the beginnings of a participatory project. So, Kate, before we meet and hear from our guests, Can you maybe just give us a little bit more context regarding maybe when or how you managed to begin the project during COVID and how COVID might have created obstacles for you in terms of setting up in Dublin? Because I believe you were coming from Cork at the time. You were like situated in Cork at the time. And then through that, maybe again, how the collective came into being.
Cool. Thank you, Eve. Yeah, so I applied for the residency back in the before times in January. It was after I think we had done the 2 years of art, architecture, activism. So I think all that work and time looking at how institutions are complicit in precarious living made when I've never seen a residency that I thought I was appropriate for. I was like, oh, this is actually makes sense. This is what I do. Obviously, spatial injustices, did I really even know what those words meant? But I was like, okay, housing, something, a load of other things. So I applied for it with a very different project to be in St. Andrews, to bring Josh McPhee, who's part of the Just Seeds printmaking collective, to come over and set up a workshop in the community centre, plus do the people's kitchens in people's homes. So my idea was I would just go there and through this get to know people by setting up, doing things in people's homes and doing workshops, because there's Dublin 8 has such a long history of art and activism that I knew that I needed to just spend loads of time getting to know people. But instead, obviously, I ended up going into lockdown on a farm in Kerry. And then that whole world of the revolution became very far away. So I was minding children and my mother. But one of my lifelines was the reading group, which started because John Bissett, who I was really looking forward to getting to work with, as well as Rita Fagan in Dublin. But that couldn't happen. So we started working together online, and John recommended reading The Right to the City by Henry Lefebvre. And then that just started the reading group. And it was to bring together people that I was working with around the world for the reading, but more as I'm more interested in the relationships between people. So it was more about everyone meeting each other and building the army, even if we're in lockdown. That spanned over 35 weeks. And that's where the collective prints came out of, through everyone's handwriting and work within the group. And then that became the starting point for when I actually got to Dublin 8 and started working with John Bissett in real life, which could segue us to John Bissett.
It's in fact, this is a very good place to bring in one of our first guests, John Bissett, who is, as Kate said, based in Dublin and is one of Kate's main mentors in the project as well. So John Bissett was born in Dolphin House, Rialto, a social housing complex in Dublin. He served an apprenticeship as a fitter in the Irish Glass Bottle Company in the 1980s. He's a graduate of NUI Maynooth with a degree in sociology and English. He continued his studies in UCD and was awarded a master's and a PhD in sociology on the same occasion in 2001. John currently works as a community worker for the Connell Community's Local Drugs Task Force in Dublin. He has been a member of the St Michael's Estate Community Regeneration Team since February 2001. So, John, just to bring you into the conversation, can I ask you maybe about first of all, how you came into the project, and then I suppose as you're talking through it with Kate, how or where you would see the overlaps between your work and Kate's particularly in terms of approaches to community practice, where you both found kind of common ground, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a good phrase because Kate's residency is with common ground. But probably one of the interesting things about Rialto is that there is an actual studio which was put into the building on the basis of work that a number of people had done over the years. So we've got this space, an artist studio within the community centre. So in a way, it gives somebody a base to come to work in. And I think it's quite a good space. It's kind of sort of basic, but yet it's good, and it's within the community centre. So anybody who works there, and Kate came last year, can connect with people in the building and also outside the building if they want. Usually there's a sort of stipulation on people in the studio that they connect with the community around the place. And there have been like many different artists from all over the world over the years. So Kate started last year, and she's come like a tornado through Rialto. And so she's like, I've just said to her, what are you interested? Like I've said, look, there's a whole range of things happening. So obviously she came up with the reading group idea. I can't even remember suggesting the right to the city, but anyway. So obviously that was a piece of work that went on. It was on a Sunday, which is a good way of getting divorced, I would think. I thought it was a really good piece of work. And obviously Kate went away, and even in the studio, she had a lot of the notes already done and printed from some of that, from the different reading groups on the Sundays. We read some mad stuff, like this guy Posadas from South America, who I've never heard of, and I still haven't got a copy of the book, but what a fucking nut job. Anyway, I'm sorry for coursing on the podcast. But really, if you want to know the history of South American Marxism and Trotskyism, it was just a brilliant crash course. So anyway, and then so there's kind of like lots of pieces of work that I do, and that with other people. So you mentioned St. Michael's Estate. We've been campaigning for 20 years that to keep the land where on that estate. We've been through so many different waves of you might get something, here's something, no, you're not getting it, we're going to sell the land, and so on. So Kate has come into that group, and it looks like we might get a result now with money from Europe about building a new project there. So Kate's come into that group, and that's probably the longest running one. In some ways, it feels like it's getting to the end of that or something. But anyway, but she's come into, so all of the other groups that she's come into are at various stages of their life cycle, if you like. So recently she's come into the sort of work with the European Action Coalition that I've been involved in. Like I went to a meeting in Athens in 2013 for the Alter Summit, and out of that, the European Action Coalition for the Right to Housing and the City was formed. And so Kate's kind of tied into that work recently. It can be a bit it's got quite internally political in some ways, but it just shows you the difficulties of building, I think, sort of transnational actions across countries. It's not easy.
To bring it back to Kate there, just when you're talking about as well that a lot of this activism has to be now kind of transferred to online forums, that's kind of also relevant to the question I was going to ask about how useful, within that kind of context, can art practice be? Like, where do you really see the role of art practice with Kate coming into all those projects, obviously within the role of a social artist? So Kate, maybe you can kind of respond to that. John mentioned the printworks you did and that you kind of responded. He called it, you made kind of a pictorial summary of some of the work.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really relevant to any of the work that I'm doing and why that might work is because of the 30 years beforehand. So I think it's like that. It's like why, like, I've learned more in Dublin 8 and it hasn't even been a year than I probably learned in 10 years. And I think that's because the work has been happening for so long. And there's a real, like, everyone is up for the revolution. You know, it's not like usually you can go into spaces and people would see art as like a side thing that, might be kind of nice if we've time away from activism. Whereas in people we're working with really see it's like, oh, actually, if we're trying to create another social imaginary in another world, then we need other languages and we need other spaces. So I think it's very easy then for me to be in all these groups with John, because everyone there, I live off other people's energy. So it's all like, and I know it's a lot of groups, but I love that, because I love seeing how they all interconnect. So the work with the like structural violence against youth and community work, and the drug problem, like all those, it's violence from the state and it all relates. So it helps me to understand, you know, class analysis and all these things, because I'm in all those groups. And it also helps me see that, oh, actually, it's, for me, it was very much not, it's like Dublin 8 doesn't need me to do an arts project. Like there's, you know, it's already there. It's like, but maybe I can use the platforms that I'm able to use to bring it out more. And I think people kind of are in any of the conversations me and John are having, people are like, oh yeah, let's publish, let's do radio.
But also in a sense that I suppose within the kind of story or the narrative of the project itself, what John was saying and what you've kind of expanded upon gives us a very kind of good sense of where the ideas, I suppose, for the type of print, you know, the type of work that was produced for the exhibition emerged from, you know, how these sort of synchronicities happen and synergies happen between people. So again, because you've kind of brought the story up to being based in your studio, or the studio in Dublin, I'd really like to bring in Siobhan Kavanagh now, who's also Dublin based. She is the amazing voice you heard earlier singing. And just before we drag Siobhan into the conversation, I just want to introduce her properly. She's a Dublin-based vocal artist, songwriter and creator of musical arrangements with and for bands, ensembles, singers and electronic artists. She works collaboratively with visual artists, dancers, street and circus performance, reacting to the themes presented with performance, song and artistic expression. Siobhan's vocal and academic research includes opera, jazz, traditional and contemporary performance, anthropology and ethnomusicology. Siobhan blends all the elements, constantly researching and exploring new creative practices. So I would just be really interested to see what happens when Siobhan Kavanagh meets Kate O Shea in Rialto, you know, in that studio space, and what happened then.
Yeah, well, we were dying to work with each other, I think, for ages. And then with Kate moving back up to Dublin, it was a great opportunity. And Kate brought me to the cemetery, and she knows how I love this, you know, anything to do with death, which is kind of morbid, but, you know, such as life. But yeah, so, and then she brought me to this amazing space in the Golden Bridge Cemetery, where, which is in Inchicore, and we just started to think on a kind of a musical journey, I suppose, of what we could do in the space in the graveyard. I'll just say graveyard because I don't really, I suppose it's fine. But yeah, and then I asked a friend, Molly, did she want to record some flute playing the Limerick Lament, and we had a go at that, and just the space in this graveyard is just so beautiful. It just gives so much. So and then from there we invited Craig Cox into the picture, who and he plays fiddle, and he's also kind of a composer in his own right as well, and artist. And
I think it links back to what John was talking about, you know, stories and how we tell stories. So in terms of like grassroots, like storytelling across, you know, borders, music is obviously really important. So I knew Siobhan's background in community music and having huge integrity in what she does, and then being really talented and amazing as well. So I knew, I was like, there needs to be other languages, and then music needs to be one of them.
So can you both talk a bit more about that? Because, when we're talking to John, the work itself, I'm just kind of interested in following the trajectory of the actual work, the kind of mediums or the outputs as well that were coming out of these, of these kind of engagements between you. So, and how it just completely evolves without a very specific plan, it seems. So it's literally through like different relations, relationships basically, in that nearly kind of borrowing whatever medium comes with the person and then incorporating it into the scheme. So maybe could either of you talk about that of, so you're sitting in the studio in Rialto, which is covered, again, maybe Kate or Siobhán, you can kind of describe for the listeners, what is on the walls, or, it wasn't just like a blank slate. There was literally every single inch of the studio was covered in some print work or, and then maybe Kate, how that then kind of, I suppose, naturally transpired to you doing spoken word, or if you want to take it up there.
Yeah, I'll let Siobhán start. It's funnier if Siobhán tells what she thinks about the studio.
Yeah, the studio is covered in print, so it's really adaptable. So we can just every time I come into the space, it's changed, by some more kind of add-ons by Kate. And also we were allowed to move stuff around as well, which was fun. And it is like a vortex of print, so you kind of go inside it. And we recorded the film in there as well. But I think what I like about the prints the most is the fact that they can move around so much, And we also brought them in. Well, Kate brought them into the graveyard as well, to record there. So I just love that they could just move anywhere. And Kate, you're not precious about the prints as well, so you could kind of like trample all over them, or not that you want to, but they have that kind of that's what I like about things like that. Things, you can't be too precious about this stuff. It has to change. Like, there's a lot of change going on. But coming back to kind of as well about how the stories and the songs all find all come out of this kind of like work is that they're always there, like John was saying, and Kate as well, that history gives you so much, and everything's there to use, and sometimes you just need to be in the space and connected with people, and you just get everything just comes to you, and it's a very organic process, and it's always it's very natural, I think, the way that works, but connectivity and magnetism, like that's community work, like, and it all kind of, it comes from each other, and it comes from history, but it's always there, But yeah.
Siobhán was saying, in terms of the print and everything being everywhere, the exhibition is in Lord Mayor's Pavilion in Fitzgerald's Park in Cork, and it's a small space, so we are going to cover it completely 360 on the inside, and there is going to be a bed, because we printed a duvet and printed some cushions. There's going to be a lot of sculptural work by Aideen Farrell. So I think the not being precious is a really big thing, and it's something that I love breaking people through in terms of art in general. Like, I always would have my art on the ground, so people walk on it, or people write on it, or because it's like nothing. It's not a finished thing ever. So say, for example, the print work, it was when I arrived in the studio, it was more actually of like a hiding behind your prints thing. I sent all the prints that we would have done in the reading group to print, and they arrived, and then I just stuck them up everywhere, because it was like a confidence thing of I did something. And then I would have, and then I read, like, really closely read John's book. So I rewrote pretty much the whole book on top of the prints. And that really was how I understood, because the John's book covers in detail the process of what has happened to St. Michael's Estate, which is the area of land that he's talking about. So in a non-COVID land, I never would have had that time, you know, to really understand page by page. And I think understanding, and that's my whole thing of understanding the work from before. So through like trying to deeply understand the book, I felt like I learned loads, and then that informed everything else. So that's why, like, it's all collective print work, because it's all coming from lots of different knowledge bases. So the exhibition is in process. It's like it's in process, because it's always in process, and it's about collective energy and collective voice. So for me, the more people in an exhibition, the better. So I don't pare back things.
And taking that cue of the lots of different types of knowledge and collective energy, I'm going to use that to very smoothly transition into introducing Fionnuala O'Connell, and get her to also give her account of her involvement in the project, and just to give us some background as well on her practice. Fionnuala O'Connell is based in Cork, and she's a youth worker, activist and artist. Her work is often focused on international networks of solidarity within social justice movements. She has a BSc in International Development and Food Policy, UCC, and a Leaders in Training YMCA Youth Work Training course certificate. She's currently a youth project worker with the Cork Migrant Centre, and her focus in this work is well-being and integration hub working to support and empower young people through facilitated activities including visual and performative arts for transformative justice. She is the leading coordinator of the development of anti-racist toolkits targeted at primary schools, secondary schools and teachers. And Fionnuala's was again one of those biographies that I had to cut about 2/3 out of for the sake of time. So taking that into account, maybe Fionnuala, you can kind of fill that gap for us by maybe beginning to give us maybe some context or talk a bit about the kind of projects that you've done recently, that you're currently involved in, and maybe then how that kind of overlapped, how you crossed paths with Kate O Shea and became obviously sucked into the project to get as well.
Yeah, so in May, I think, COVID lockdown, young people weren't coming to the centres anymore because of the restrictions and all that. We heard the news of what was going on in America, and that kind of flooded the coast of Ireland, of course. And so everyone was feeling a lot of things. This is the murder of George Floyd that happened in the US. So that was something that kind of just arrived, and young people responded, and Black young people responded to it.
By the time we got to the second project, it was 40, but I think on the first Zoom, it might have been 20 something. But it all, that the first project all happened through like that Zoom and collecting all the words and sentences, and then it was through WhatsApp. So I would send the teenagers like my screenshots of like Arabic, and I'd be like, "Is that right?" And they're like, "Oh my God, no, it's so wrong." But that was less to do with me getting stuff out of them, and more that it was just such a specific moment of a collective energy, you know, where they were like we didn't know whether they would want to, and they were just all like, let's do it, you know, like we want to do something. And it came from them. They were like, we want to make something that covers this, and we want to say something. So I think that's why it worked, because of the webinar. And then it was really like, I like working really like to deadline last minute. So like they'd send me a drawing 3 hours before going to print, and they'd be like, could you put it in? I was like, yeah, we'll put it in. Let's go. And that's how the rest of the bigger project worked after that.
So you were working with Aideen Quirk and the Cork printmakers for that project, right? Yeah, and I'm sure she really appreciated those last minute.
But I think that's as well about why the relationships are really important. So I think it was Aideen in Cork printmakers and her relationship to the Migrant Centre, and then Aideen was like, Kate, you can do this, let's do it, you know. So it was all people who, like I trusted everyone involved. So I was like, yeah, it'll work. And then, from that, then
But I suppose that's the kind of not the point I'm making. I suppose that's what I'm trying to find out about. Is it, again, this idea of not necessarily outcomes that our artworks as outcomes, but it's actually securing our continuing relationship you've made with somebody, a collaborative relationship, and then that just continues. As if that's the main outcome of the projects. Or is that right?
We're going to do stuff together so Fionnuala's in the exhibition and her paintings are going to be in the exhibition, but we're also, when I was in the studio, I sent Fionnuala my first poem that I did with Siobhán, and then Fionnuala did a poem in response. So it's just playing with things, and then I think as well it's like that real, like how friendships start. When I was doing the work with the teenagers, I was really unconfident because I'm not actually that confident at giving workshops. I'm like confident in organizing people and getting class people in to do them, but I was less confident. So I rang Fionnuala and Raphael and was like, I'm freaking out. You need to help me write this, and then they helped me do it. And so I think, it's that kind of building of relationships, but also and how all these projects connect in a way because they're all happening at the same time. All the Dublin 8 work now, which is based on those massive rolls of print, that came through doing the work with the teenagers because we were pasting the Cork City Library. So we sent everything to print in 60 meters high or whatever, which I'd never done before, and then found out I could do that. So then when I went to Dublin, everything became massive prints.
In the last couple of months, definitely, there seems to be a very conscious focus on the notion of kind of self-care or mutual aid, or, again, that this project seems to have fostered very strong kind of sustainable collaborative relationships. But then there seems to be kind of a conscious critical reflection on, well, how do we maintain them? And also just in terms of yourself and burnout, so which I know is another kind of one of your kind of thematic interests, but quite difficult to apply to oneself, wouldn't you say, Kate O Shea? So I'd like now just to introduce our other guest, Dr. Krini Kafiris, because this is very relevant to, I suppose, how her kind of working relationship and collaborations with Kate and others throughout the project. So Dr. Krini Kafiris is a trainer for gender, media-related issues, as well as sustainable organising, a researcher and activist. She's currently writing a book on radio, sound and space during the Greek crisis, and that'll be published by Dirty Books, which explores how occupied radio in Greece between the years of 2013 to 2015 worked to shape the social imaginary. She is a member of the Transnational Institute of Social Ecology, the Living Commons in Ireland, and a co-founding member of the Aesthetics of Empowerment with myself, which, as we previously said, is an international feminist training research collective, so it gets two plugs here. She has participated in autonomous feminist groups, in Greek social solidarity economy collectives, and has taught media and communications at Greek, Cypriot and British universities. She holds a PhD in media and cultural studies from the University of Sussex. So just again, before I allow Krini to speak, just to give again a bit of context, myself and Kate met Krini at Trees, the conference in Athens in October 2019, and approached her due to seeing her deliver her fantastic paper on burnout within social activist groups. And she spoke about how we might work more consciously towards sustainable activism. And it was just complete, again, synchronous with what Kate and myself had been talking about within our own praxis and in our own kind of collaborative work. And there obviously isn't time to explore all the kind of other work that Krini's been involved in over her career. But maybe, Krini, we can get a sense of it. If you begin with maybe how you found yourself involved in this particular project. And And also then, if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about you have like multiple roles, I would say maybe, within the project, as both a participant and a mentor to Kate O Shea.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Eve. I think that when we met at the Transnational Institute of Social Ecology, I had presented this paper that I wrote. It was a reflective piece about some trainings that I had attended at ULEX project in Catalonia. And that was something pretty new for me. And it was a real eye-opener. I actually thought it was the missing link to lots of things that I had been doing and trying to do. And I remember talking to Kate, who said exactly the same thing. This is the missing link at some point. So I guess, the one thing about the sustainable organizing thing, which has had a lot of things in common with what Kate has been doing, and Eve as well, actually, is that it kind of focuses on the things that are necessary for us to continue to struggle and to be involved in things. And these are things that we are not trained to see in a capitalist culture. So it kind of helps you understand that the deeper connections to yourself and to other people and to nature, and an understanding of yourself and your group in terms of an ecosystem, right? So these things actually can work as the resources that allow you to continue and to avoid burnout and to avoid dropout. And, the way that you do that, the process through which you deepen those connections, they call a culture of care. So culture here is a process. It's not like a thing, or it's not one particular practice. And, it's so difficult sometimes to talk about care. I know Kate has talked about that. She said that to me on multiple occasions, oh God, care, like, it's it's something that has such a strange resonance. It makes people think of like, we were going to pamper ourselves and indulge ourselves and be selfish and only think about ourselves. But in fact, according to this sustainable organizing approach, it basically means kind of remembering that you and everybody else in your group and in your social movement are human beings that have minds, emotions, bodies, imaginations, and that all those different aspects of yourself also have involve needs, and that it's really important to make sure that we deal with each other, taking this into consideration, and we remember in terms of ourselves as well. So, we can't have groups and long-term struggles where we deny these things and we pretend they don't exist. So basically, we just try to deal with each other in taking that into consideration and taking care of as many basic needs as we can in the way that we deal with each other. So that's it. So when with Kate, now and the second thing I think that we have a lot in common with, which is, wow, it was like really uncanny at some point when we were talking about things. I think Kate will agree with that. We were just like, really? Oh, wow, really? You too? Oh. And so is this idea about, about new spaces, about how are new spaces created and how are they collectively created by people and what can happen in them and how we can challenge kind of everyday ways of thinking about ourselves and what's possible. And for me, that's like a big thing for a long time now. It's especially in relation to radio and sound, and that project that I'm working on about the occupied public broadcaster, a story that very few people know about abroad, where a far right-wing government basically shut down the entire national broadcaster in an afternoon. And lots of the people that worked at the station, including many people who had nothing to do with radio and joined in solidarity, tried to keep it going. So that was this, I think it's one of these spaces I know that Kate is interested in as well, where, everybody had to find a way to collaborate. Social relations that developed were very intense. And through those collaborations, through the things that happened, all these myths were completely exploded, about the fact that people can't work together for that long because they come from different political leftist traditions, that ordinary people can't do radio, that, people can't be committed, that we're all shit and we don't really care about things that long. We won't take risks. And just the most extraordinary things happen. And the terrible thing is, again, looking at this experience through a kind of capitalist culture or even through kind of an old school left culture, people talk about this in terms of failure and loss and lost opportunities, and don't really pay attention to the things that did happen. So I was talking about this with Kate, and Kate suggested, that Dirty Books take this on, because I think her understanding, which is mine too, is that, this is not just a great story. This is not just important for history, but if we don't bring these kind of things to light and also challenge what politics is, and what that means, then we really can't we can't really build on that. We can't take it further. It'll be something that's going to be lost to history. And not just lost to history. That's I wanted to see the opposite. It's not just a question of history for the history books. It's lost to activists who could actually do something with that now. So so a lot of commonalities and a lot of things that we really want to focus on. Yeah, storytelling. I would just want to say the storytelling is very much a part of that, and I think that. It's really interesting how the collaboration that Kate talks about, which is so important in these spaces, is actually how we get to know, how we learn different things, how we connect with each other. That was really important for me to think about in terms of different forms of arts as well, and not just radio or not just organizing, but how art on an individual level, but also as a collaboration, can be a kind of reflective tool to help people both connect and also form different types of knowledge, form different types of understandings, which can, again, challenge those myths about what we are and what we can do.
And so it sounds so, Krini, you came into the project through the reading group as well.
Oh, yeah,
was
I forgot to say.
No, I'm just interested in how you go from, specifically in relation to Krini, but also then to give context to how it might work within a broader group of a reading group. At what stage does the kind of casual, conversations, building up a relationship with somebody, then become more structured, more focused? How that might have happened between yourself and Krini, or Krini, if you want to speak about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Eve. So I think with any process, there needs to be like quite a good bit of time of not knowing, and you're kind of going with it and seeing what's going to happen, and then there comes points where things start to make sense. Like in this case, it was like with each collaborator, a kind of journey would start to make sense. So say with John, it was like, okay, yeah, we're working with these groups. This is what we're doing. With Krini, I wanted to go for professional development funding with the Arts Council. And I was like, okay, what's my biggest problem? My biggest problem is burning out and dropping off the face of the earth. So I was like, I don't want that to happen. So how do we make that not happen? I was like, okay, maybe I can actually get money to like pay someone to teach me how not to do that. So then I asked Krini, would she be my mentor on a culture of care and burnout? Because I kind of got to the stage where I was like, it has to be central to the work, otherwise I'll keep doing it. Like I've burnt out 6 times in 10 years. So I was like, if it doesn't now become a focus, then I'll just keep doing it, because I'll just be like, yeah, but this project's really important. So yeah.
With the mentoring, I took Kate through all the stuff that I know about the sustainable organizing as it relates to preventing burnout, which means it goes through kind of every level. At the individual level, certain practices and ways of doing things, at the interpersonal level, at the group level. And then we also talked about certain specific issues like the use of storytelling as a tool, as a reflective tool, as an individual or for a group. And the final one will be sound. So how to think about sound in relation to, actually, this is a little bit different. The last one isn't really that much about the sustainable organizing. It's about how to create space through sound and how to contribute to the reshaping of the social imaginary. So that final one is a little bit different. But having said that, I mean, it's what's really central to sustainable organizing, and something that I've been thinking a lot more since working with Kate, are creative tools. And so, and art practices. So, you know, you could definitely use sound and in all manner of ways as a group reflective exercise, activity, or tool to kind of deepen those connections with the group, and to deepen different kinds of understanding and knowing. So yeah, that's something very interesting, I think, that has come out of this collaboration. How my focus now has turned more to the use of those kind of tools and practices and activities in the context of sustainable organizing. Yeah.
And then I suppose, and actually this is not just relevant to how to Krini's position or work within the project, but everybody's in a way. It's there seems to be so many kind of streams to this, you know, that have been brought in to the project, to the Dublin 8 project. I'm just wondering then how, in terms of what Krini was saying about creating spaces, how might you all see, or even Kate, kind of in the midst of it, see all this sort of conceived space, you know, these relationships which are real, how they all then feed back into the project, or how they might come back as it within the way that Krini describes within a space, you know, how might the conversations, the exchanges, the poetry that came from the printing, you know, that came from posters working with Fionnuala, you know, all these interrelationships, how they might then be kind of not even in a conclusion, but, you know, kind of interwoven back into the Dublin 8 project. I know it's a big question and probably not one to be, you know, it can't be answered now midpoint to the project. But yeah, so would anybody have any thoughts on that themselves, or?
I can start. Yeah, I think because for me, in a way, a lot of it's just all kind of starting. So what helps me to organize it within my little head is that I like, it's all alternatives to capitalism, and that needs alternative platforms. And I'm like, there are 3 alternative platforms that I'm working on: radio, print, and film. And then they all fit in with the idea of the archive and what is an archive. So I see that the space the community center in St. Andrews can be a space where the radio or film or the work is produced, but then it can also hold all the international stuff or stuff between Cork or whatever. So the platforms can work in the real physical space, or it could be like, say we're doing, like at the moment, organizing something between here and Sydney, and that's another form of space, you know, that like they can't come here. And so there's that. So Lucia is designing the online infrastructure, because it's like, long term it has to be an alternative system. So it's like, that's not going to happen in a year or 2, but the idea is that people would go straight to that as opposed to Facebook or whatever. And then all of it has to go within the thinking of culture of care. So that's why we do like Wednesday yoga and Sunday Afro-Brazilian dance. So and then obviously music and everything fits in. So like there'll be gigs, and well, the reading group will be reading again. But it was just, for the moment, I guess I became aware that in January, too many people around me were crashing and burning out really fast. And I was like, we actually can't even help each other at this stage. So I need to create some spaces that can help us collectively. Because it was just like every day there's people falling, and it just had that feeling like we need something to hold people in some way. So I think it was very influenced by working with Krini, and actually I was laughing at, you said earlier that I met you in Athens and was like, this is the missing link, but then like burnt out 5 months later. So obviously, like, I'm only addressing that now.
It's a continuous struggle for everybody, you know. I mean, it's an ongoing process that doesn't doesn't have an end point, does it? We're all going to mess up, you know, and then try again.
So I'll just conclude with this question of, and maybe I'll go to you, ask you, John, first, of how this kind of approach, really, that's been described, you know, in the last hour or so, how can that kind of approach to practice, to activism, ever reach a conclusion? And what I mean by that, John, is so as you explained at the beginning, you know, you've met different artists have come into the space and occupied that residency for a year, 2 years or whatever, and then they've left. So I'm wondering, you know, Kate will also leave after, you know, when the funding is finished and everything. But, you know, how does something like this then reach a conclusion, or does it, in your view?
We'll just have to get her a job, won't we, Eve, in
Is
Dublin?
That it?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's very interesting at the moment. So yeah, whatever. Look, we you know, we go in cycles. We had a kind of 5 or 6, 7 year process of anti-austerity artwork in Dublin, called The Spectacle of Defiance and Hope. And you know, like, so I think there is, like, there's a kind of long tradition around Rialto, especially, of working going back to the 80s with groups like Wet Paint, Neil O'Boyle, who's still around in some capacities today. So, um, like I think what Kate said earlier about, you know, like, some people are resistant to the arts. We have to kind of beat them over the head sometimes, but there is a kind of openness and a willingness. And just for me, I think the thing is, like, it makes the journey interesting. You know, you know, in the sense of, like, how are we going to convince people? How are we going to bring people along? How do we get people engaged? And, like, so, for instance, in the Red Wheelbarrow group, I know that already the kind of, Kate's angle on things has infused a new energy in that group, because we tend to tell each other the same stories that we've probably been telling each other for years. So it's just, I think, and the other thing is, like, it has a use value, to use an old term, right? So I think the kind of materials, the work, like, so in relation to the housing struggles, which are desperate, like, the thing about I think the work is that it has a political, strategic use value that feeds into those struggles, and that, but part of that, you know, like, it's a bit like the old school left that Krini talked about. You know, it's all bang the drum stuff, which is, yeah, great. But let's, you know, the bit of music and the bit of, looking at it sideways. So I think there's, yeah, I think we've a bit of a journey to go yet. We're not even out of the first half yet, Eve, really.
Thanks, John. Yeah. And Fionnuala, just to, you know, I'd like just to, yeah, it'd be good to hear from you all just before we're hopefully sung out by Siobhán at the end, if that's okay with you, Siobhán. But Fionnuala, I'm just really interested as well. This idea of, well, who knows where, you know, it's going to conclude, or how, or whether it's just fluid and it just keeps going, you know, on in various forms. I'm interested really as well, just in terms of your own work, Fionnuala, and how actually it goes the other way, how this being part of this project might be already impacting, or how you might see it impacting on your own practice, or whether it has since, you know, collaborating with Kate.
I think since starting to collab with Kate, I think it started more like a conversation, talking about, same as Krini said, about, oh yeah, we need to create another space, we need to create another we need to create a world that's not what's happening now. So it was through those conversations and those discussions that I to join the reading group. And it's just that kind of, you think you're thinking one way, but you have other people with that same stream of thought, and meeting those people as well. I think that's, yeah, I was able to do that within this group. And in my own work, I think just bringing people along and listening, like the storytelling aspect as well, is something we do a lot through our work, through social justice, transformative justice, and just bringing people along, listening to their stories, what can you do? It's not about, we have this idea, we're going to do these projects. It's turning to the young people and listening to them, listening to their stories. How do you want to tell your story? How do you want to express yourself? And creating spaces where this can actually happen, where it's not like, oh, we got this funding and here it is, now you have to do this. We're like, so you want to do this, we're going to try and get funding so you can do that. So it's just kind of that movement. And about the longevity of it all, I think with Kate, what I learned from Kate is, and how we work together, is like the relationship, as long as those relationships, those collaborations are there, I think it just moves. It just moves together. And yeah, I hope it doesn't end. I hope we just keep going down this road and creating. And I love to do the feedback with Kate, because she creates something, I try to create a response, and how I interpret her work and what I hear, what I see in my mind when I read her work, and I try to have my own kind of take on it and do a response. And I love to do that with art as well. So yeah, just that working relationship, that collaboration, that support and motivation, confidence, because she would be like, this is amazing. I'm like, it is good. It is amazing. But it's that kind of relationship that just keeps things moving. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Fionnuala. And Siobhán, again, just I love the way Fionnuala described this idea of movement, the constant sort of movement and solidarity. What I particularly really love about your involvement in the project is that it's brought music as a central force, an activist tool, particularly with, its ability of storytelling. And, it's just so nice how that's become now a real kind of another kind of core component within the project. Just do you have any kind of thoughts regarding how that collaboration that you did recently with Kate might have informed your practice in any way, or or even just for the future, thinking for the future of how it might impact it or shift it in some respect?
No, definitely. I think it's kind of bringing song into a different kind of collaboration and another way to tell a story, so definitely has affected my own work in that way, and also kind of the way it kind of flows, I think that's really important, that there's the positivity of it actually was a hugely affected me a lot, because it's working with Kate is always a positive experience actually, and it's kind of hard for it to be, I'm not saying I work in a negative way, but I kind of do a little bit. I kind of go into the darker realms, and I stay there a lot, so it's nice to come out into the light, and that's impacted me and my future work for sure. You don't have to work in a negative way, I just happen to like that train of thought, but it was really nice, I think so. Yeah, it definitely hasn't impacted the future of my work in that way. So thank you, Kate. Yeah.
That's really nice as well, the way you can see then the kind of strong overlaps between you all, so you all come from very different areas or experiences and approaches and disciplines or practices. And, what Siobhán is talking about there completely feeds into, I'm thinking in Krini of, the type of tools that you were talking about with Kate about, creating kind of this sense of solidarity that Fionnuala was also talking into, you know, whether it's through music or, you know, that kind of create, you know, beyond a kind of a feel good, as you were saying, but something kind of more in depth and kind of critically based than that. Krini?
I think that that's completely the case, and that I don't know. I find it really interesting when Kate was describing her live printmaking collaborations with people in the spaces that she's created. There's something about that, I think, that maybe is underexplored, perhaps by researchers or writers. And it kind of reminded me at the radio station where people who had never done radio in their life joined in with people who had, and kind of people had to figure out things on their own and work together. And there's something about that collaboration, and there's something about the connections that are made, the relationships that are made, and the kind of things that you understand about each other and of course this takes place in the context of a greater struggle, a greater political project. There's something about that that's priceless, I think. So I think that what I really liked about Kate's work and her ideas, and what interests me as well, is the fact that in this space we're not going to just, you know, challenge these myths about capitalism, challenge these myths about who we are and what we can do just by talking about it, although we will talk about it as well. It's not just about theory. It's not just about abstract envisioning of things, but we actually do that by collaborating, by doing things, by having a practice and a process. And I think that that's something that maybe is missing from other kind of understandings of political activism and space and what happens within them. So I really like that. I think that's really, really important. And yeah, something that's worth really looking into more in different ways, research-wise, you know, yeah.
Well, that's a nice place to leave it, I think. Kate, do you have any last thoughts, or are you...
No, that's perfect. I think I was just thinking there that, so before this year, I would have been very like organizing events for very large amounts of people. And I think what this year taught me was focusing on like one-to-one relationships, and the importance of spending time with them actually leads to much more people in the long run. So like say with John, we've worked together a lot, but then because of that, I've met a load of people, you know, and it's like same with Krini and Siobhán and Fionnuala. So it's that like, it's actually that and I can only work like this closely to people that I really trust. So I think it's the trust thing for me, and the time given to hanging out is important. But yeah, that's my final thought.
Well, thanks to Kate and John and Fionnuala and Krini and Siobhán and Michael, who did the sound tech, and Evie McCarthy from Sample Studios, who kind of put it all together. So Siobhán is going to sing us out with...
I'll sing the Blacksmith. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Thanks,
yeah.
Siobhán.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.
A blacksmith courted me 9 months or better. He fairly won my heart, wrote me a letter. With a hammer in his hand, he looked quite clever. And if I were with my love, I'd live forever. But where has my love gone? With his cheeks like roses, and his good black billy cock on, all crowned with primroses. Well, I'm afraid the scorching sun might spoil his beauty, And if I were with my love, I'd do my duty. Strange news has come to town. Strange news is carried. Strange news flies up and down that my love is married. Well, I wish them both much joy, though they can't hear me. And may God reward him well for the slighting of me. For there's no trust in men, not even my brother. And girls, if you must love, love on each other. And dry your brandy tears and refrain from weeping. And happier we shall be for our next meeting.